Okay, so here's a share screen. Let's see if I can, okay, let's do present mode. Okay, thumbs up if you can see the screen. Okay, awesome. So the topic for tonight is Shalom Bayit when stuck inside the Bayit. And we'll begin with some funny memes. So this is a good one from Will Ferrell. Before you marry a person, you should first make them use a computer with slow internet to see who they really are.
Yeah, that's good.
In our house, certainly with the limited bandwidth and every kid now on the computer, we have had a lot of slow internet, and it definitely brings out the worst in us. Frustrations are at their highest when the internet is not working well. Oh, Sarah's joining. So we thought this was a good one, and I like the chuckle that we got in response. Let's go to the next one. Dad, the lunch lady said some really bad words today. Son, your mom is under a lot of stress these days. So this one gets to the reality that connects last week's discussion to this week's discussion, which is that often a marriage is put under a lot of stress because of the child rearing. For those who have young kids or teens, even adult children at home, there is such a strain on the marital relationship as a result of being everything to your children, from being their barber to their teacher, pretty much being their personal secretary. So this is also, I think, a factor that's led to some strain on marriages. And maybe we'll just do one more. Okay. So these are some things from Twitter that I on my feed. Day 24 of quarantine, my husband just called me mom. So this gets to the reality that we're expecting the world of our spouses. Now that we are home with each other 24/7, we are expecting our spouse to, not just be a partner in rearing children, not just running the home, but also sometimes being a mom or a dad to us, being a business partner, being everything in between. And so I think as the expectations for the marital relationship have gone up and up, of course, it's inevitable that there's more disappointment. So that's another funny one. And this one I already, the second one I mentioned, that marriage in quarantine is texting a meme to your husband and waiting to hear him laugh about it in the other room. So I thought that was a cute one as well. Okay. If there are other good ones, you're welcome to share in the chat or during the open mic discussion segment of our learning with Dr. Avigan this evening. Before introducing Michelle, I want to share one brief Torah idea that will frame some of our conversation and some of our learning together. Here goes. The pasuk in the second parak of Breshit, which describes the first couple. I'm just going to mute all so that there isn't so much background noise for this piece of it. So the pasuk in Breshit describes the first couple, and it's really the first person before we get to the first couple. And Hashem says, "Lo tov heyot adam levado." We're familiar with these words. God looks at all the creation. So much of it was good. Even some of it was tov ma'od. But the single nature of Adam Harishon without having a helpmate was not good. And so the solution to this not good is Eselo Ezer Kenegdo. Hashem announces, I'm going to make for Adam Harishon an Ezer Kenegdo. And this is a very perplexing phrase. It's paradoxical. What does it mean? Is it la'azor or is it neged? Is it helpful or is it oppositional? Which one is it? And so many of the commentaries offer a way to reconcile the tension within this phrase. And some say it's really all about, la'azor, but sometimes in order to help, we have to be slightly critical in a loving way. We have to offer a different perspective, an opposite perspective, but of course, out of love. That's one way to read this as sort of a singular phrase. Everything is modifying, the connecto is modifying the azer. Rashi, however, reads it in a sort of dialectical binary way. He says, quoting from the Gemara in Yevamot, I'm pointing along here with the arrow, Ezer kenegdo, zacha, Ezer, if one merits, or if one is worthy, then a marriage is something that is helpful, useful, beneficial, pleasurable. Lo zacha, but if a person is not worthy, then the marriage is kenegdo lihilachem. The relationship becomes so oppositional that it becomes like a war. This word of lihilachem is quite strong and quite striking, but it's not so far from what a marriage can become when things go south. And so the way that Rashi distinguishes between Ezer Kenegdo is with this word zacha, which is about being worthy of it. And how does one become worthy of a marriage? That's more on the Ezer side of the spectrum than on the Kenegdo Lihilachem side of the spectrum. It's all about work, putting effort into it. It doesn't just come to us naturally. Love is not something that we fall into. It's a verb. It's something that we must actively pursue and pour a lot of effort and energy into. It's an art that requires skill and that requires a lot of energy. And so the marital relationship from the very beginning is something that is powerful. It is something that has the opportunity to be completely helpful and beneficial and uplifting and inspiring, or it can be the opposite. But the idea behind this Rashi is that our relationships with our spouses are going to have a huge effect on our life, and it is upon us to determine which way it is going to go. So with that Torah idea in mind, I'm going to stop share for now, and we're going to begin to learn from Dr. Avigan a little bit more about how we can try and make our marriages more on the Ezer side of the spectrum, where we can use each other to grow one another and to provide joy instead of the opposite. And so Dr. Avigan really needs no introduction in this crowd. All of us know her as a pillar. Her and her husband, David, were pillars of the Sharon community, have been here for a long time and raised their kids here. Michelle has incredible wisdom and insight. She comes to this particular conversation with a PhD in education in psychology, and specifically 30 years of clinical experience on a whole wide array of issues. And specifically in her private practice in Needham, she focuses on couples who are in distress. And so without further ado, it's really an honor and pleasure to hand over the virtual mic to Dr. Avigan to share some wisdom with us.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Chessis, and it's so nice to see everybody here. I know a lot of you, and thank you for that introduction. The only thing I'll add to what Rabbi Chessis said is that I work from a perspective of emotionally focused couples therapy, which is a model that uses some of the most recent scientific research on attachment and bonding to help us understand relationships and understand relationship distress. So I will talk for a little while, and there will be some time for questions and just kind of to see if I'm hitting the things that people are interested in hearing about. But basically, we humans are bonding mammals. We really can't, we need each other, and our basic need for connection is is as essential to our survival as water and air, and that, you know, oftentimes in our current society, need for others is seen as actually a weakness. You know, men are supposed to be like James Bond and, you know, very strong and independent, and women are supposed to be able to do it all and have careers and not need any help. But in fact, the ability that we have to reach for each other in moments of distress and respond to loved ones when we hear that call is actually an ancient survival code that's wired into our brains, and it is really our greatest source of strength. Babies are born in this world crying out for kind of help and comfort, and we kind of are, you know, our impulse, our natural normal impulse is for our heart to go out to them and respond to their distress. So, you know, again, this survival strategy means that we need a few very important others in our life who are going to be our safe haven to return to and our secure base to kind of go out to the world from. So, you know, what happens, kind of, you know, what happens when these you know, what happens when these reaches and responding, you know, kind of impulses are blocked. Our brain actually codes that as a threat signal, right? So that when we reach in a moment of need and we don't get that response that we need, or maybe when we show up for someone and we don't kind of have we don't get a signal from them that they're happy to see us, our brain actually codes that as a danger signal. And we humans have a very limited repertoire of responses when we are under threat, and it's basically fight or flight and freeze, right? And in a relationship, fight can look like anger or criticism or demand. It can even look controlling. Flight or freeze in a relationship can look like defensiveness or coldness or being very rational or very disconnected, very kind of numb or unavailable. And these actually responses to threats are really very useful in general, right? There's not a right way to respond to threat or a wrong way to respond to threat. But couples really get into trouble when they get into negative cycles of interaction, where the more one person is kind of banging on the door saying, "Where are you? Where are you? I need you." And they're saying it in a very demanding, angry, critical way. The more the other person, who doesn't really see that as a loving call for connection, the more the other person is motivated to kind of keep that door closed, to take a giant step backwards, to really stay distant or keep their wall up. And couples get into these really negative cycles where the louder one demands, the more the other person pulls back and shuts down, the more unavailable that partner is, the more frantic and desperate the person gets on the other side of the door, and the louder they bang. And that negative cycle is a really common cycle that we see in couples. And of course, even the most connected couples fall into that negative pattern sometimes. But the problem really becomes when the pattern becomes so rigid and so common that it takes very, very little to set it off, right? We are, as couples, so tuned into each other that kind of a furrowed brow or a distant look is enough to trigger that negative cycle of interaction with couples. Now, there's a very good reason that couples who tend to have these different ways of responding are drawn to each other. Because the truth is, it's a very useful and helpful team. To have one person in a relationship who's able to kind of step back and be a little bit more dispassionate and cool, and to be able to say, we don't have to worry about that, this is fine, it's all going to be okay, is really useful. Being able to shut down your responsiveness, I mean, because we a lot of times we think about our first responders, our firefighters, and our police officers. We want them to be able to really kind of shut down their emotions when they kind of run towards the fire, when they run into a situation. That's really useful. And then again, it's incredibly useful to have a partner who's on the other side of the spectrum, somebody who is going to light a fire under us and say, you know what? This is something to get upset about. This is really, we got to get revved up about this. This isn't okay. So the kind of the, it's interesting, the Ezer Kenegdo, kind of as Rabbi Chesses is talking about, kind of the two opposites, the people who have different ways of responding to each other. It actually can be a really useful combination and a really great team. The problem is that when couples get into these negative cycles of interaction that become too rigid, and the main relationship questions, which is kind of, are you there for me? Or will I be all alone here? Or when I show up for you, even with all my imperfections, will I be enough? Or you will just sort of reject me and judge me as wanting. If the answers to those aren't really positive, then couples get into trouble. And because people find they get into these negative cycles of interaction, they often find they feel really isolated and lonely, and honestly kind of emotional loneliness and emotional distress, kind of especially when someone is physically present, is really very, very painful. And emotional isolation, we know, is very traumatizing to humans because, as I said, this need for connection is so central. So we are in a particularly difficult time right now because already the epidemic in our society is loneliness. And now we're in this situation with COVID, where we are all feeling kind of more anxious, more worried, and these anxieties are actually quite real. And we are all really in distress, and we have pressure, sometimes financial worries, sometimes worries about our own or our loved ones' health, sometimes, worries about kind of people being far away. And we are all, kind of very much aware now of how much we need to turn to others, to reach for others, and we're not able to sort of get this responsiveness. So in other words, our attachment system is really turned on and turned up and primed for connection. And yet we're also probably going to be very, very sensitive. Kind of our level of threat is really pretty intense. And so our main moves in our moment of threat, which might be to kind of get revved up and kind of go into fight mode, to get very demanding, to kind of get very intense, to say, to come up with a long list of things that we have to do and get really intense about that, that might be really turned up. Or if our moves tend to be on the opposite end, if our moves tend to be to shut ourselves down, to numb out, to kind of not really kind of be so in touch and feel our distress, then our tendency to kind of distract ourselves, to want to get more distant, to get more shut down, that also might be much more prominent. And so now, here more than ever, we need each other, and we might be really upset about kind of what's going on and really sort of be aware of our need for connection. And our partner might not sort of look like somebody who is a source of comfort and support. Our partner, might actually look the opposite. Our partner might actually look like somebody dangerous, somebody who's not at all on our team, not at all on our side. Sometimes when couples get into these really negative cycles of interaction, we find that, again, back to Rabbi Chess's example of being kind of in a war, it does feel like we're in two foxholes, kind of just throwing grenades at each other. And one thing that we know that happens when we're all in our own foxholes is the first thing that disappears is empathy. Because you imagine if you're in a foxhole and you're really absorbed in taking care of yourself and managing your own distress and worried that there are bombs coming and things are going to hit you, you don't have time to worry that other person over there, they might be bleeding. Oh no, I feel really bad for them. They must be really struggling, must be really hard for them in their foxhole. You don't have any space for that, right? You're really kind of absorbed in your own self-protection. And when we can no longer kind of look at our partner with empathy as somebody who must be struggling and in pain themselves, then the only meaning that we make of their behavior is kind of that they are they're trying to hurt us, right? They're sources of danger and they're sources of hurt, and they're threatening. So the goal is really to sort of catch these negative cycles of interaction, to understand our own moves in these cycles, and to really be able to move towards each other from a place of more vulnerability, right? To be able to understand that, wow, when I get scared or when I feel hurt or when I feel sad, this is what I tend to do. And maybe on the inside, I'm feeling scared and hurt, but on the outside, maybe I look very angry. Maybe on the outside, I look very distant or disconnected, right? Maybe on the outside, I look very dismissive of what's happening for you. But what's really happening is that that I'm really scared and hurt, and I don't really know how to talk to you about that. So our goal is really to see if we can turn towards each other in more open and vulnerable ways, with the hope of really getting back on the same team, to kind of see that we're both kind of in this storm together, kind of, rowing the boat in the same direction, that we're that the walls that we build to protect ourselves are not just around us to keep, and to keep you on the other side, but the wall is around the two of us together. What the problem is this negative cycle, and we're in it together. So I've been talking for a while here, and I'm curious to sort of hear kind of how this is landing and kind of what comes up for you as I kind of talk about it in this way. I don't know if Rabbi Chosas, I don't know if you want to see if there's anybody.
I will encourage those who are able to unmute and to share how this is landing. Are there questions or follow-up about some of the specifics that Dr. Avigan was talking about? Anything that's applicable? Of course, without getting too personal, not too much self-disclosure, but within reason, how are some of these principles resonating? Well, I'll go first then, and ask a little bit about how to untrigger oneself from the the danger, fear coding of the brain, because sometimes when something very slight, a look from a spouse makes me feel upset and alone and triggered, and I can sort of sense that it is slowly happening, and I don't want to get into that foxhole, but I feel it, sliding there. I feel myself sliding there. So how do I catch myself, sort of mid-motion to get back to stable ground?
Yeah, it's a really great question. A lot of times we really wish that when we get triggered, and the trigger that we're talking about is the kind of the very intense feelings that we feel about this person that we need so desperately, right? But if you ask me, how will I stop feeling scared when I get what looks to me like a signal from the person I need most in the world that they're disappointed in me, or that I'm losing their love just a little bit, or even worse, that they're taking a giant step backwards and that emotionally they're sort of leaving me alone or abandoning me, right? How will I stop being scared about that? I will tell you that you will never stop being scared about that. That intense, powerful feeling comes from the fact that that woman sitting next to you is so important to you, right? And that you are so aware that you need her so much. And that you don't want to stop feeling that intensely about her. So the important thing to sort of for me to say is that the feeling itself is not the problem. The problem is what you do with that feeling, right? That if, when you have that feeling, you turn to her and sort of growl something about how, right, what are you giving me that face for? You always give me that face, right? Right? If you turn to her and say something blaming, or if kind of when you feel yourself getting triggered, you on a regular basis go downstairs to start checking your email, right? Because it's sort of safer and easier to kind of remove yourself and be unavailable in that situation, right? Then we're going to start getting into a little bit of a problem, because whether you realize it or not, that behavior that's being driven by this fear, right, is going to send a signal to her that I think you probably don't want to send, right? So what we understand is that, right, someone that you love very much, did something. That's the cue, right? That was a cue. It did something that sort of triggered some very primary and kind of painful feeling for you. Um, the first the first goal is to sort of slow yourself down enough that you can be aware of the feeling. Ideally, I would love it if you would be able to say, uh-oh, uh-oh, something just happened. When I see that look on your face, I get nervous that, I mean, and again, I'm making this up, Rabbi, right? I'm making it up based on sort of what I see with my couples, but right, I get nervous that that you're disappointed about something, or I get nervous that you're mad, or I get nervous that something, right? With the goal of, sharing a feeling in a more vulnerable way so that you can get the reassurance that you want and need from, from your sweetheart, right? Um, and although we are exceptionally tuned into each other, and so that, we, in a very micro way, are watching each other's moves very carefully, we are very poor mind readers.
Mhm.
And we, again, because our brains are very kind of wired to have that threat detection really active and alive, we tend to skew things towards sort of the negative interpretation, because you imagine it's safer, right? I mean, it's safer, right? So kind of assuming that something is a threat signal is a safer way to approach it, right? So so again, we're more likely to assume that, who knows? I mean, who knows what was going on with Sarah at that moment, right? Right? You might have had a little indigestion, right? That might be the reason for that look on your face, right? Who knows? Um, but it's, so the problem is not the scared feeling. The problem is not being able to turn to each other to talk about it and share it when that happens.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
I know that these are hard things to talk about, and I don't, maybe you're very comfortable to sort of just listen and not talk too much more. If there's just a specific general idea or topic that you'd like me to address or speak to, I'd be happy to do that. Or I don't know, Rabbi, if you have another idea. I know that we're coming close to towards the end of our time.
Yeah, if there's anybody who would feel more comfortable over chat, you can even chat privately to me, and I can raise something if that's more comfortable. But if there's any issues that you'd like to raise, we'd love to hear you.
So I want to say something. I think that the discussion is very helpful and very applicable in so many ways to what happens to couples in general, but also to what's happening now under these circumstances. And as I was listening, I was thinking about how we are all, regardless of how strong the relationship is, but we are all in the situation where we have to very abruptly negotiate and renegotiate roles and airspace and time and boundaries about where in the house are you going to be, where am I going to be, and it's all happening so fast, including professional roles that are changed. So it's this feeling of threat is it can be so overwhelming, and it's all over. Yeah. And so it is a helpful framework, and I think it helps just understand.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you talked about it that way, because it is really true, and it is really true. We're all kind of we're all under stress, and we're all kind of under threat. And in your relationship, I sometimes think about it as kind of emotional cash in the bank almost, right? That if there is enough sense of safety in a relationship, it allows us to slow down a little bit, to even imagine that there are other possibilities than the one. If you are a bunny in the forest, like, and you hear like a quick, something, a loud noise, right? You can't afford to sort of slow down and spend a lot of time and think like, should I scamper away, or maybe it's sort of a friendly somebody coming to feed me, right? I mean, the life or death risk is too great, right? So that if you're in a relationship where you're already very hurt, and you've already your experience has taught you that chances are that what's incoming is another bomb, then slowing yourself down and being willing to open yourself up to the possibility that maybe, even though that felt a little painful, that what my partner is saying wasn't intended to hurt me, maybe there's another explanation, maybe there's something else going on, maybe they're struggling, maybe they're hurt. So in order to kind of really change this negative cycle, it does really require us to slow ourselves down and take risks to reach to each other and be open to the possibility that we might reach to each other and respond to each other in a different sort of way, and open to the possibility that what's happening with our partner is not coming from a place of being dangerous to us, but coming from their place of hurt and upset and threat. So, I appreciate the idea that we want to just sort of recognize the context here, that we're all kind of really under a lot of stress and threat. And it's a painful, difficult time for a lot of people.
I have a question.
Sure.
I think one of the challenges is that everyone sort of, one, we're living in a very small temporary space right now, so that exacerbates everything. But I think one of the challenges is that everyone, including the children, because we have 11 and 13, are at different places at different times. Meaning, some people might be feeling like, this is fine, I got this, and I'm good, and like we're gonna get through this, and I think that's like the majority. But then, you have those moments or those times where you're like, I can't do this forever, or like, and those happen for different people in the family at different times, and it's hard. I think, I guess my question is like, how do you navigate that? Where like most people might be okay, but one person is having like their moment, but like you've gotten over your moment,
Yeah.
and like, and it's sort of like feeds off each other, like everyone in the family.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. And I think that that's a really good point, right? That, and again, sort of, I've been doing this for a long time, and I know a lot about couples dynamics, but part of how I know how to do this is because I'm a human too, and I have my own partner, and I get caught in these cycles also. So, it's not like I'm some, expert and knows how to do it all the time, right? And so I know what it's like, right? That if I'm a person that actually manages my stress by kind of shutting it down and boxing it up and putting it up in a closet, right? Then when even someone I love, actually especially someone I love, comes and wants to like open their box up and blah, like all over the place, right? I might have a hard time responding to them, not because I don't care about their distress, but because they're opening up all of their distress is doing a really something, it's poking like at my coping strategy there, right? He wants me to open up my box, and I just shut it back up. Like, I like it, it's up there in the closet, I'm good. Like, I don't want to look at that, right? So one thing that I might do, again, because I'm managing my own stuff, is I might say, oh, like, you don't have to worry about that. Oh, that's fine. Or, or what's the matter? Or like, take care of your stuff, or, right. And so, again, that's the problem that you're talking about. And so the only answer is to kind of be aware enough of the process of what's going on to be able to respond in some way, and maybe to say, I see you're struggling right now. I don't actually even know I have the bandwidth to talk to you about it right now. Like, are you okay? Like, can we, like, let's, right? Or maybe if it's our child struggling and it's not we don't have the option to say, you deal with it, I can't do right now. Like, it's maybe enough to sort of have the awareness of, okay, I'm going to have to like tolerate the distress that's going to come up for me when I get close to you and we really talk about this difficult thing that you're dealing with, that's going to trigger me a little bit too. So awareness of the process is sort of the answer. It's a messy process, and there's no perfect way to do it, because we're just all imperfect humans. Does that answer your question?
Sorry, it was muted. Yes, it's very helpful. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. I'm glad. Any other thoughts? This is, this is hard stuff, and this is you know, again, I think that, you know, one important thing to talk about is that, and I think I said this before, but I will say it again, there is no such thing as a couple that doesn't sort of fall into negative patterns or kind of, you know, fall into disconnection sometimes. And that the goal of, you know, couples who really do this well is not that they never get disconnected, but that they're better at finding each other again after disconnections. They are better at not damaging each other and the relationship when they're disconnected. And they're better at kind of, you know, reaching for each other and owning their own stuff and their own moves, right? So that a repair will look like, I'm sorry, you know, I'm sorry that happened yesterday. I hate it when we fight. I think I understand what was going on for me, right? I think that when you said that, I got really scared, or I felt really hurt, or, right, it felt like you were telling me that, that I, you know, that I can't get anything right with you, or it felt like you were saying that I had to do things this way, and unless I did it, that I wasn't okay. And when I feel like that, then what I usually do, right, is you know, I say something angry, or I storm out of the room, or I do this, and I know that that's hard for you when that happens, right? So, so the secret is really figuring out how to find each other again and make repair and to fall back into that loving connection.
One more question, if it's okay, about suggestions for outlets, when so many of the outlets that we have for marital stress are not available to us. So oftentimes people might take out some of their, I don't know, ambition at work, or, you know, they can just let loose a little bit with their buddies and get their social outlet through their friends, their religious outlet, you know, hopefully at shul, or, you know, in a learning group. But all those outlets are sealed off right now, and it's like, if there is stress in the marriage, where do we turn to deal with it? Hearing you say that, you know, we should ideally be turning towards each other, but sometimes the coping mechanism is to deal with our own stuff separately for a little while, so that we can eventually turn towards each other. Any recommendations of, you know, outlets?
Yeah, well, you know, again, because I do think that, because I do think that sort of connection is so important, that you know, if we can't turn towards each other, I hope that we can turn towards some trusted others, friends or family members, or, you know, actually, you know, there's, if anyone is sort of looking for therapists or reading material on emotionally focused couples therapy, I'll be happy to kind of point people in that particular direction. But, you know, part of the problem is that, you know, people who have a general coping style of stuffing things down and boxing things up, you know, that works on a temporary basis for a little while. And so I worry about kind of, you know, I worry about that bubbling over and what that might look like. So kind of figuring out how to turn to somebody to be able to kind of talk about that and let that steam out a little bit would be great. You know, we can still exercise in, you know, safely, I think, during this time. I think that that's important for a lot of people. And people who find that they get very revved up by their distress and anxiety and find it kind of bubbling up on the inside, and they have a lot of energy. Like, again, often, you know, exercise and talking to other people is a much more natural way that those people cope, and hopefully that's something that they can still do. But again, the danger is that if, you know, you don't kind of, if you don't sort of allow for the possibility that kind of maybe your partner is not such a danger, and that, you know, you aren't able to turn to them with any kind of curiosity about what's going on, any sort of non-judgmental sort of, curiosity, then you are gonna kind of get more and more entrenched, unfortunately, in your kind of, in your own sort of version of the meaning that you've made of what's going on. And again, I mean that, sometimes self-protection and couple protection are really two very opposite things. So it's sort of risky what I'm describing, but I, again, hopefully the risk will be worthwhile.
Thank you. Any other last comments or questions before we bring things to a close? Okay, well, I want to thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing so much of your wisdom. I gained a lot from it, and I know many on the call did as well. Really, such deep insights into ourselves as humans and as just people who are craving connection with our spouses. And so I know I'm gonna grow a lot from this, and we all are. So really, thank you so much for helping.
My pleasure.
And we'll wish everyone a Lila Tov, and hopefully some more Shalom Bayit going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Okay, good night to all.
Great job, Michelle.
Thank you.